Joining me now is Maine's Democratic Congressman Jared Golden. He was the only House Democrat to vote in favor of the 6-month stopgap bill. And we should note, Congressman, debate on the bill is now underway as we are having this conversation. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Good to be here with you.
I want to start with the statement that House Democratic leadership put out last night. Get your reaction. It reads, quote, Donald Trump and Republicans are crashing the economy. We remain strongly opposed to the partisan spending bill under consideration in the Senate. What do you make of that statement of the opposition by everyone else except you in the House?
You know, there's a proverb out there that warns leaders that how you catch them is how you must lead them. And, you know, the thing that I would point out is a lot of the talking points being put out by my colleagues is trying to conflate the CR with the Republican reconciliation budget that we all oppose. That would slash Medicaid. It would give tax breaks to the rich. It would greatly, you know, do damage to our nation's fiscal well-being with deficit, you know, more deficit funding. That's all bad, and Democrats are opposed to that. None of that is in this CR. There's no Medicaid cuts, no matter what some of my colleagues are saying. There's no tax cuts in it for the rich. They're, in fact, in some ways actually helpful to Medicaid. So, you know, on the merits, this CR, while there are some anomalies with it, some problems, it's mostly a continuation of Biden-era government funding. And a lot of Republicans are disappointed with that, even though at the end of the day they voted for it to avoid a shutdown.
Well, a number of your colleagues argue the other thing that isn't in it, guardrails, to prevent or at least try to slow down President Trump and Elon Musk from trying to slash the federal government spending and federal employees. How do you respond to that piece of the argument? Are you concerned that there are no guardrails?
Well, I would say that anything that the president and his team has been doing or is doing today that's illegal will remain illegal after the passage of this CR. And as Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and others are warning, the opposite would be what would come out of a shutdown. Expanded authority in the hands of the president and his allies like Elon Musk to go ahead and furlough the federal government, send workers home without pay, and start to disassemble government services for the American people.
You know, Congressman, there's a really extraordinary moment when Leader Jeffries was asked if he had confidence in Leader Schumer, and he said, next question, effectively. What do you make of that response?
Yeah, I'm not going to get into their personal New York politics or the back and forth between the House and Senate here. Obviously, I think that Senate Dems are about to make the right choice for the country, as difficult as it may be. And I think they're taking a responsible path here.
So do you have confidence? Do you have faith in Leader Schumer?
Well, look, I'm not going to agree with him all the time. We represent a much different constituency. But in this case, I think he's making the hard choice. And I think he's being honest and truthful with the American people that this is the best path forward for the country at this moment.
I want to play you what your colleague Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said last night. Take a look.
I think there is a deep sense of outrage and betrayal. And this is not just about progressive Democrats. This is across the board, the entire party. Yeah. There are members of Congress who have won Trump-held districts in some of the most difficult territory in the United States, who walked the plank and took innumerable risks in order to defend the American people, in order to defend Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare, just to see Senate Democrats even consider acquiescing to Elon Musk. I think it is a huge slap in the face.
What about that argument, Congressman, that largely House Democrats, as Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez argues, walked the plank, and she calls this betrayal, that Senate Democrats aren't walking it with them?
This gets back to what I said earlier. How you catch them is how you must lead them. You know, having won the votes of the caucus, claiming or informing them to go ahead and tell the American people that this was about fighting to protect them from Medicaid cuts. they have to continue on with those talking points, despite the fact that it is easily dissembled and proven that there are no Medicaid cuts in this bill. Yeah. That's called walking the plank, and personally, I chose not to do that. I think that Senate Dems are pretty much in the same posture that I was a couple nights ago. We're going to vote for the CR, keep the government open on the merits of how harmful, the argument of how harmful a shutdown would be. And when it comes to protecting Medicaid, standing up against those tax cuts for the rich, at the expense of our constituents, that's where we're going to get to level with the American people and have an honest fight that we can win.
Congressman, something else that we're hearing from your Democratic colleagues who oppose this CR is, if not now, when? Will there ever be a moment when Democrats have this level of leverage, acknowledging the fact that obviously Democrats are in the minority in the House, in the Senate, Republicans control the White House. I don't have to tell you that. But will there be another moment when Democrats have this type of leverage?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you got to know when to hold them and when to fold them. And the fact of the matter is, there was no leverage here.
You don't think so? You don't think Democrats had any leverage to say, if you want us to sign on to this, make a deal with us, get a better deal?
If Republicans needed the votes, then we would have had leverage. The fact of the matter is, they didn't. And what they know and what Leader Schumer understands is, in fact, if a shutdown began, we would have even less leverage in that situation and be in a perilous political position where we would likely have to offer even greater concessions just to get the government open again.
I want to put up some numbers from last month's CNN poll. 73% of Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents say congressional Democrats are doing too little to oppose President Trump. Do voters want you to work with President Trump right now, do you think, or do they want you to block him?
I think that my voters want me to work with the president when I perceive that's in their best interest. And I think that they want me to go ahead and fight them as hard as I can when they think it's not in their best interest. So Medicaid cuts, they're not for that. In fact, a third of my constituents depend on it, and I'm going to fight that. I'm not going to support it. But there are ways that we can work together. I've looked at trade issues relative to Canada up here in northern Maine. I can tell you we have a different picture than a lot of other folks around the country.
Let me ask you big picture about the state of the Democratic Party right now, obviously on its heels in the wake of its losses in 2024. Do you believe that now, 50 days into President Trump's second term, your party, the Democratic Party, is any closer to finding a cohesive message and strategy for this moment?
No. In fact, after the election, when a lot of people like yourself were asking me to come on shows and talk about how the party would find a new direction, a stronger message, I warned that I thought come Inauguration Day, a lot of people would move on, shift into full resistance, and stop focusing on what we're getting wrong. What do we have to offer the American people? And where do we go forward from here so that we're not in this situation after the next election? I think it's very important that Democrats not forget to focus in on ourselves, why the American people voted, not just for President Trump, but for a Republican-led Congress in both the Senate and the House. And we better figure out how to make the case to the American people that they want us there after the 2026 election with a House majority to offer a check on that uncontrolled Republican power that we're seeing in action today.
All right, Congressman Golden, thank you so very much for joining us. Please come back again soon. Bring us your perspective. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.